This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Welcome to another episode of, well, what you just heard in the intro again, Basket Case Clubs. We are having a great time having these discussions about the things that make basket case clubs in the first place, and the things that then can turn those basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Joining me again is Steve. G'day, Steve. How you doing?
I'm really good, thanks, Mick. Yeah, we were just talking before we connected here about the fact that we're having a lot of meetings, and I've even been on the road today and been catching up with people face to face, and then back in the office for webinars and special general meetings online for amalgamations. And I haven't told you this yet, but tonight's meeting was the second of two meetings where we got an amalgamation of two cricket associations over the line, the first being held yesterday. So all special resolutions carried at both those meetings. So really good news, and really exciting move for those associations becoming one. To
I can't wait to have an interview with those guys to talk.
Yeah. I'm sure that I'll have a number of people probably fighting over the opportunity to have an interview there.
Let me talk about it.
Yeah, really exciting.
I know there was
cool
some
stuff.
Basket cases in that history, wasn't there?
Yeah. And I mean, what's really funny is now so after last night's meeting, out of the woodwork come people who are saying things like, I've been saying for years that we should have done this. Yeah, but you didn't. So look, and the time was really right for them too. So, they followed their journey, like we said a few weeks ago, and we spoke about amalgamations and mergers. And for those guys, the discussion's been happening for realistically about 12 or 18 months. So when we got involved, people were primed, ready, and it was just a logistical process of getting the stuff done and kind of calming the tension a little bit and taking all the hard work away. So that's exciting. And I'm on a bit of a high from that, which is always cool.
Awesome.
But that's not what we're talking about tonight. You had an interview. Tell me more.
Yeah, Rodney Gaunt is the president of Western Districts Baseball Club out in the western suburbs of Brisbane, and is a bit of a stalwart in baseball. He's moved around in different roles at pretty much at all levels of the sport here in Queensland and down south as well. And it was good for, this is Basket Case Clubs, so it doesn't take much prompting for people to share some of the pain points with us. And with these guys, the basket caseness started with just dodgy factions in a club, people not wanting to talk to other people.
What, politics in sport?
Yeah. So some tricky stuff and look, Rodney's very happy to share the story about how it's not just one person ever that deals with the quagmire of stuff that you've got to go through in these sorts of situations. But it's been great to be able to watch some of that transition firsthand as well with the work that we've done with the club and with baseball here in Queensland as well. So Rodney, I reckon, put his finger on communication being one of the keys. Before we launch into the interview, I'd often tell people that I never think communication is the disease, but rather a symptom of the disease. So I don't want to do too much of the talking. I'm happy to let Rodney talk for himself, but what can come from that is just an unfortunate level of disengagement from members and pain that can just take time completely unnecessarily.
Yeah, what fascinates me about that word communication is that it's so often raised as the problem, and like you've just covered, it's often more a symptom. But what's fascinating is the different perspectives. And when we say to a committee, "How well do you reckon you communicate with your members?" and what do they always say? Pretty good.
We're good. And then they think about it some more. It could always be better.
But then we go and ask the members, how do you reckon the committee communicate with you? And the answer is often quite different. And
a lot of type comments.
Exactly. Yep. And what's really important to remember is, that communication relies on both the giver and the receiver. So, I look forward to hearing what Rodney had to say. Let's get into it, eh?
So joining me now is Rodney Gaunt, who is the president of Western Districts Baseball Club operating from Athos Park. It's Darra there, isn't it, Rod?
Yes, it is, Michael. It's Darra. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me. So Rod has quite a bit of experience, not only at the club level, but also at the regional level and the state level with baseball in Queensland. So Rod, before we launch into having a bit of a chat, why don't you give us an indication of how you got involved in volunteering and what your background in the club and in baseball is?
Have you got 24 hours?
See if you can do it in 24 seconds or 24 words or less.
Well, I joined a baseball team down in Melbourne through my school, and I've been hooked ever since. So once the school team folded, I joined my local club in Melbourne and moved all the way through that club to becoming president for nigh on 20 years. We then bought a business in Brisbane, moved up to Brisbane, and I tried to have a leave pass from baseball, but it wouldn't let me go.
It wasn't to be.
It wasn't to be. So I got involved in Masters up here to start off with, and again progressed through the club to become president. I was recruited to join the board of Baseball Queensland for two or three seasons. And then I left the board to become chairman of the GBL competition committee, which is the committee that steers and manages the summer baseball competition.
So when you moved up here, this is a bit of an aside, did you find much of a difference between the baseball scene in Victoria and in Queensland?
Oh, look, the only real difference was that there's a hell of a lot more players and clubs in Melbourne than there are in Brisbane. Otherwise, the culture and the way people approach the game is all pretty similar.
Okay, that's a good thing to know. So when you travel interstate, at least you know what you're getting.
The quality of baseball in Melbourne and Sydney would be better than the quality of baseball here in Brisbane, simply because they have more players to choose from.
Yeah, I suppose if you build the bottom of the pyramid up, then the elite end, the pointy end at the top is going to grow as well.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. And for instance, the top level of senior baseball in Melbourne has a promotion relegation system, so the clubs need to be on their game all of the time. Otherwise, they get relegated at the end of the season if they finish on the bottom of the ladder. Historically, that was almost like a death sentence for clubs, but it's a lot more easier now to get relegated and then get promoted back up again the following season.
Okay, that's a good thing.
It is.
So take us through some of the main challenges that you reckon you've faced at Wests. Oh, look, and if you want to go outside that, that's good enough as well. But this being some stories about basket case clubs, what's your experience in some pretty ordinary times?
Oh, look, when I joined Wests, there was about 25 million factions within the club, which is pretty difficult, seeing as they had about 150 members, but that's okay.
Literally fighting with themselves.
Oh, all the time. And unfortunately, the various committees that ran the club over that period really didn't want to take control. It was almost like management by consensus.
Right.
And of course, they never ever reached consensus, so there was no management.
Were the factions over anything in particular, or was it pretty much any point at which there could be a disagreement, there was a disagreement?
I think it was more friendship based, and those small friendship groups that really wanted to go their own way as far as the direction of the club was concerned. And of course, their own way was always different to another faction's way, if you like.
Yeah. Did you find that people would flip between friendship groups depending on what was being discussed, or were people pretty much sticking to party lines?
If I can take a step back, I think the biggest reason why we had so much factions was that the club's communication was non-existent.
Okay.
So there was no steady and consistent story coming from the committee down to our members. So the members were basically writing their own agendas, if you like. And one group might want cushions on the dugout seats, and one group might want something else on the dugout seats. Just as stupid as that.
Then you've got a committee that's not making any decisions, and so it's just a discussion that gets propagated almost indefinitely, I suppose.
Yep, gets propagated indefinitely and never acted upon.
Yeah.
And that's a huge source of frustration to general members.
When you say there was no communication, what did that mean? That there we're going back a little while, so obviously the use of social media would have been non-existent, but web and email communication, flyers, posters, was it just there was kind of a dearth of activity from the committee out?
Exactly that. There was a dearth of activity from the committee out. If you had a good relationship with one of the committee persons, you might find out what was going on at committee level, but that was about the only time you ever would.
So you had to be in a group that had a connection to the committee somehow to even find out what the direction of the club was going to be.
Exactly right. Yep,
Okay.
exactly right.
And so I suppose that went across everything as well, not only cushions on seats, but that would have made it difficult to organise teams, training times.
Oh, the whole darn lot, Michael, to be honest. Individual coaches chose their own teams, so they picked the people that they liked.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily all of the players deserved their positions. They were just liked by the coach. The club had no infrastructure, had no plans for developing infrastructure. We were probably the Division 1 clubs. We were the poorest resource club in the competition.
Okay, so were you at the same place? Were you already at Athos then?
Yes, we were.
Okay, but
the history of the club was not developed at all. We were a bit of a gypsy club. We moved from over about 4 different locations through the history of the club, and finally got onto Athos Park, which was a good move as far as the club was concerned. But then they made a very poor political choice of inviting a soccer club that had been kicked off their grounds to join activities at our park. And I guess it would be fair to say that soccer clubs generally over history have been difficult to get on with. And it's only been over the last couple of seasons that we've had a good relationship with the soccer club. Previously, it was an all-in brawl.
That makes a massive difference, doesn't it? When you've got no relationship to actually having a relationship and finding out, oh, these are people on the other side of that big fence at the top of the hill.
Oh, it was almost a light bulb moment when we started having some good discussions with the soccer group and realised that between the two of us, we were much more able to get cooperation from council, for example, than when we were fighting amongst ourselves.
So through that time, are there any incidents that you can look back on now and say, with the benefit of hindsight, and saying, well, actually, I can laugh at that now, but didn't necessarily feel like that at the time?
Yeah, one really stands in my mind, and that was that the committee in the day, quite a number of the members wanted to keep the club down to the size that it was when I first joined, and if not smaller. And I don't understand their logic, except that perhaps they didn't want to work as hard as they needed to. I don't know that there was that much logic, to be honest. I just think they wanted to be in their nice, comfortable little bubble, not having to change. And of course, what they don't realise is that change will always occur, and you need to be able to go with those changes and be successful. I had stand-up arguments with committee members as far as that issue was concerned, and we never agreed on that. And the only way that the club moved forward was for those committee people to retire.
Right. Oh, okay. So they really had a let's leave it as it is because this is the devil we know type of attitude, or
no, precisely that.
Okay. Do you think there was also, going back to the friendship groups or the cliques or the factions within the club, do you think that, we've got this to be our little patch that we can protect if we just keep it, not necessarily the size, but keep the people that are within our gates and don't let anyone else in, slam the door behind us syndrome?
I'm sure you're 100% correct.
So over the time that you've then dealt with the communication problems, the faction problems, the infighting, even, and then the relationship with the other tenant on the site, what sort of solutions have you been able to implement to be able to affect good change at the club?
Well, the improvement started when the old guard retired, if you like. We then had the president immediately prior to myself work almost as a one-man band. And of course, when you're in a one-man band, you're not arguing with anybody. You're just going along with your own agenda. And so my previous president was Dave Carr, and he put in some good things in place. And I've just worked on those things that he's implemented and expanded upon them. But the first thing I put in when I became president was to just get every member's email address and email almost weekly. So that the only thing people could complain about was an overdose of information rather than a lack of information.
So if I can just interrupt for a sec there, does that mean that prior to that point, the club didn't have a good customer relationship management database or didn't have one at all?
No, it did have one, it just wasn't used.
Right, okay.
Again, because the older guard weren't technically savvy,
mm-hmm.
and they weren't able to use the functionality of the previous we've got a new membership database now, but the previous membership database worked perfectly fine as far as being able to use email campaigns, anyone who was concerned.
Mm-hmm. But they just weren't, maybe they weren't interested in communicating or didn't want to do that level of work.
Could be either, Michael. I really don't know. But probably both a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say the old guard retired, does that mean that we were kind of literally sitting around twiddling our thumbs, just waiting for them to figuratively fall off the perch?
Some of them, yes.
Was there any coup or was there a mutiny launched?
Purposely didn't do that.
Why is that?
There was enough disharmony in the club already.
Okay.
The last thing we wanted to do was to leave bad taste in people's mouths.
So how long did that go on then?
5 seasons, 5 years.
5 seasons. Now, I'll apologise if I push any difficult buttons here, but one of the things that we get to see quite a bit is people who don't take action it's all enshrined in the Constitution, and I know that you know that very well from having been through it in detail and having to use it and apply what it says. But there are points in there that say if, not in these words, but if somebody's not performing or if they're performing contrary to the interests of the club, then there's a process for removing them, and here it is, and go through and follow that. Often usually it doesn't get invoked because of exactly what you just said. There's already disharmony. We don't want to make it worse. But I wonder, looking back, is 5 years of that disharmony, that stretching it out, leading to some people having sleepless nights, which is worse? Is that worse than having 1 year of a yelly and shouty AGM, or 5 years of tiptoeing around the elephant in the room?
In hindsight, she probably should have smacked the elephant right in the face.
Like a Band-Aid. Straight off.
Absolutely. The corollary of that 5 years of inaction has been that we have effectively lost a generation of our best baseballers.
That's a really good way to put it, because you may have inadvertently pushed people away from the sport if they weren't welcomed in, if the gates were slammed shut behind the small number of people that were there, and there was no active marketing campaign. And we've been talking a lot recently about the fact that marketing tools are available to everyone. We're all on an equal footing now, in the same way that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates gave personal computing, which to individuals, which gave us all the ability to do what big business was doing with supercomputers. Social media has done the same with marketing. So we've got those tools available. And if that ship sailed too early and we weren't on it at the outset, then we've been left behind. So 5 years can equal a generation, as you say. That's a great way to put it.
And it's real, because when my predecessor took over, basically our entire top team, all of those players retired. So we lost the best of our players, 15 of them, within a 12-month period. And I'm sure that's not, 15 people don't retire coincidentally.
No, unless they're all on the same plane and then get the same injury.
Please don't mention that one.
Yeah, but it's fascinating to think back and say, well, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe a year of that fighting, but behind closed doors in a committee room, would have been able to then get the membership and then start that communication far earlier, get the messaging out far quicker. Who knows what shape the club would be in. But look, we don't have a time machine. We can't go back and fix the steps that we took. And I won't even call them a mistake, because you take steps that you think are the right steps at the time. And that creates what is now the future then and the present for now. But as things moved on, how were you able to tell that things were improving?
As Dave was going through his presidency, the level of volunteers was really poor. After I took over from the presidency, I am not backward in asking people to do things. And over the first 12 months of my presidency, the level of volunteers increased enormously. And then the following year, we had volunteers actually volunteering instead of being gang pressed.
Yeah. So that was a big measure, was it, to watch the number of volunteers increase over time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you'll probably shake your head at this, but we've currently got a committee of 11 people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'll shake my head.
No, you're supposed to shake it that way.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I will shake my head.
But for us, it works really well. We've got 11 different portfolios. Each person looks after their portfolio and helps each other out. We have a social media communications guy who's absolutely brilliant. We have a sponsorship person who's brilliant. We have a lady who does events. And they've all volunteered, and the greater majority of them are players or young kids' parents.
Yep.
And so not only have we have really highly skilled people, but we have highly skilled people that are going to stay with the club for quite some time.
And because they're connected. If they're players and they're passionate about Wests, or their parents and their kids are passionate about Wests, and the parents are passionate about their kids' sport, then hopefully they're hooked.
And
So,
then,
go on.
Well, I was just going to say, and then from there, success breeds success. And we started to win a couple of minor grants. One of them was, of course, partnering with CPR to firstly redo our constitution and our strategic plan. And then again, to partner with CPR and our local soccer club to write the master plan for the park. And all of those little wins from a grants perspective just start building the level of confidence that our members have with the committee. And then over the last 12 months, we've been able to get a couple of really big grants and really big wins, so that hopefully by the start of next year, we'll be one of the best resource clubs in the competition rather than one of the worst.
That is a massive change, isn't it? So the two recent big grants that you've had, what are they for?
We've got nearly $200,000 for a batting cage, which we can use as an indoor training facility. That came from the state government. And we've got $100,000 through Brisbane City Council's Building Stronger Community program for us to put a prefabricated amenities block onto site. And they're both being worked as a single project because we have a difficult site being a contaminated land site. And Council's been very helpful to aid us in the project through an appointment of a suitably qualified person to do the environmental report.
So if I can also give you a bit of a pat on the back on that front, it's been amazing to watch from the outside just so little activity in the development of facilities at Athos Park because it's a contaminated site. And isn't that a fantastic excuse for sitting on our hands? With all respect to the great people in council who are doing their best, it is difficult for them to navigate the bureaucracy of getting things pushed through. So to see the changes there, and for those of you who don't know Athos Park, the baseballers have had to walk a long way just to take a wee at this site. So now to be able to have a toilet block right next to the clubhouse, which is also new or newly opened, then it's making a massive difference. So that's definitely worth a good pat on the back.
Oh, look, it doesn't come down to one person, Michael, as you well know. It's been due to a lot of work by a whole heap of people. Dave, the previous president, started laying the foundations for good relationships with council, and we've built on that. We have one of our committee members, John Victor, who is a professional engineer, and his ability to write architectural and engineering drawings has been key to that relationship and the working successfully with Brisbane Council on the contaminated land site, because from an engineering point of view, it's you've got to be careful. Yeah.
And you've just raised a really important point. So the work that Dave has done and continues to do, and John and the rest of the committee that you've mentioned, isn't it amazing that when you throw the gate shut behind you and don't have a good relationship and good communication with your members, you don't find those people. They're just and they're not going to come and find you if they're looking at you going, "Oh, those guys think they know everything. Not
a hope in hell. Not a hope in hell. The only way that you can get people to come and join is A, to ask, but more importantly, B, tell them what's going on and how they can help.
I make a really big point of the fact that the only way people volunteer is if they want to volunteer. So our job is not to tell them, it's to encourage them to want to. So what do they need to be able to want to? And connection with their club is going to be a great starting point.
It really is. But the next point, which is almost directly follows from that, is to make sure that people know the scope of the help that you want. If I go off and say to somebody, I want you to be a secretary, their immediate answer will be no, because they don't know what the scope of the work is. But if I can articulate what is required to be the secretary, and they can manage that requirement, then they'll say yes half the time.
Well, hopefully all the time, because you won't need to ask too many times.
Well, look, some jobs are more time consuming than others, so that's why I said half the time.
Yes, yeah, fair enough. So to wrap up then, Rod, if there was one piece of advice that you could give to other clubs who are experiencing similar situations to what you've been able to see happen in your club, what would that be?
Open up your communication.
Is there any way that you think is the best way to do that?
Well, funnily enough, I wrote a list.
Go for it.
Emails and newsletters, Facebook and other social media, clubroom posters, word of mouth through your team coaches and team managers, team chat groups, and newspaper articles.
Okay.
A whole heap of things. It's just amazing how that, it's like a wall of water rushing down the river. If you can put enough of the water in that wall, then you get outcomes.
Absolutely.
But if it's only a trickle, the outcomes aren't real flash.
Yep. So build the wall of water.
Build the wall of water, communicate as best you can throughout any device you can use.
That's fantastic, Rodney. I really love that story, and it's so good to have been a part of the journey as well, and to see these changes and to see the way that the current committee, when I've been in committee meetings with you, it's great to see people smiling. You know, everyone's there for the same reason. We love the sport and we love our club. So congratulations, yes, not only to you, but to the whole committee. And I hope that you get a chance to keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, Michael. But I think the thing that you need to realise is that we're only as good as the people that help us. And having people with such good expertise as CPR, and just patting you on the back, makes our job so much easier. You know, no one committee and no one committee person can be expert in anything. And where we lack our expertise, we have to augment that with consultants who know what the hell they're doing. And I guess, you know, from every other club, they should go and use outside people as best they can, because it's a incredibly efficient way of getting expertise.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And of course, it's a team effort on this side of the fence as well.
Yeah, on both sides of the fence. Yes,
Both
exactly.
sides. Yeah.
Good on you, Michael.
Thank you very much for joining me, Rodney. It's been great chatting to you. So there you go. That's Rodney Gaunt. Some inspiring words of wisdom in that discussion, hey?
Yeah, and as you say, communication certainly was pointed to as one of the really important points to keep in mind in going from basket case to showcase.
Yep, absolutely. And do it right. Like, don't overcook it. Don't let the important messages get lost with just noise. And social media has been a bit of a trap for that with, you know, forget which club it was, but it was someone up far north. Just watching the social media feed, it was just share after share after share. And I don't really want to see a funny picture of a dog doing something funny on the club Facebook page when that's where I'm going to go to get information about how training's restarting and that sort of thing. It was interesting though that, you know, just discussing email and the in-person stuff, that something Rodney shared with me after we'd finished the interview was something a colleague had shared with him years and years ago. If you want to share information, an email's fine, you push it out. But if you want to make a decision, talk personally. So pick up the phone. If you can do it face-to-face, even better. But don't think that email is foolproof. Email just makes more people look like bigger fools. You can't get your message, the tone of your message right in an email. And the amount of time that gets wasted in massive email trails. It's like a walkie-talkie. You press that button down and no one else can say anything while you write your 14 pages of diatribe.
Isn't it fascinating how often we find people hiding behind their keyboard and their screen? And you and I, it won't be any surprise to people listening to the podcast, but we're big talkers. So, but when
Steve's a bit taller than me, so he's a bigger talker than me.
big decisions, you know, often people trying to make them in email is so frustrating because, as you say, so much of the message is lost in translation. So much is lost when someone types, you know, a message to someone else, not to mention the fact that I think there's a whole other language within the English language now for short, you know, contracted words. But we'll often, just pick up the phone. And firstly, it's far more efficient. You can make a decision a lot quicker.
Yes.
And secondly, you don't get misinterpreted. You know, you can really clearly articulate whether you're happy or unhappy with someone.
Yeah, and that point that he made towards the end as well about word of mouth, just actually talking to people face to face or on the phone, but talking is real communication. And it's communication that develops connection, where we can actually connect with people to understand the fact that, working with clubs, we've said it before, I'm sure we'll say it again, it's much more about psychology than it is about volunteering, because we are people. Look, the other point that I wanted to point to that Rodney made was that, how he said that when you've got bad people there, it cost a generation of baseball players because they didn't act. And it was probing that I asked those questions to dig a bit deeper. But there's power in the Constitution. Just do it. It's actually going to be better if you're like a Band-Aid straight off. And with respect to those people, however, you and I have talked about it a lot, that we've never met anyone who deliberately got involved in a club to ruin it, but we've definitely seen that be the output. So they end up doing things that they still think they're acting in the best interests of the club, but they get their vision clouded. And again, this is about psychology in the way that they get buried in their issues that makes them stop communicating and just clam up. And that's, as Rodney just shared with us, not the way showcase clubs work. They're through it now, and it's wonderful to see the growth that Rodney explained from, being the poor kids on the block, and now, to see the blossoming of facilities, and then people returning to the sport, and the generations that are coming back. The same faces that used to play together are now parenting together at the club. It's all good stuff and not uncommon stories, but certainly big thanks to Rodney Gaunt for sharing his time with us.
Spot on. Yeah, thanks, Mick. Great chat, and always good to hear from someone firsthand who's lived through that transition from basket case to showcase. So great work with Rodney and the guys at West's Baseball. We have got some more great interviews teed up for our listeners, so continue to tune in. Mick and I will ramble some weeks. We'll get some...
or have a nerd off again.
Have a nerd off, yep. And we'll get some wonderful examples of volunteers out there in the real world, like Rodney in as well. Thanks, Mick.
Pleasure.
Chat next week.
See you later.